children, back to our history class today. In the last class, we have studied many important points from French Revolution. That is the beginning of French Revolution, many different reasons, social setup or the introduction of new taxes to society and the changes that happened after the guillotine of Louis XVI. A new government under Robespierre with the Jacobin club came into force and some new changes that they introduced, and all what he introduced later turned against himself, and he also faced the same fate of Louis XVI. That was, he was guillotined. Then the arrival of Napoleon. All these details we have discussed in the last class. Now we are going to discuss some another important points, just like every time we are talking about the role of men in the social changes, that is in the revolutionary changes. But here we need to study that in the source or in the course of French Revolution, along with the men and their hard work, women folk also had their own role or their own involvement in the French Revolution. By the beginning itself, women from French society also believed that their involvement or their interaction or their role will make some changes in the society if they are united together. So many of them, what is the importance that we studied, that especially women were considered as a passive citizen without having no any more important political freedoms in society, just like the men enjoy. So in order to get an idea about their own pitiable condition in society or the status they had in the society, etc., they started to think about formation of political clubs just like the men had. So about 60 political clubs were formed during those time in French cities. And the most famous among one was the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. That was the most famous among all these or among the all 60 important political clubs. And for what purpose they formed in French societies? Mainly to demand equal political rights just like the men enjoy in the society. And when the Constitution of 1791 introduced, women folk were not at all satisfied, as they didn't get any kind of freedom as the men have. That means they have no any voting right or have no any other any kind of chances to be a part of administrative system, etc. So they demanded political freedom, including voting right and to be a representative in the assemblies. So they believe that by getting a chance to be a part of administration, they can express or they can demand or they can discuss the problems that they are facing in the society and to get a solution through. And during the time of revolutionary government, just after the death or just after getting arrested Louis XVI, a national assembly was formed there, and that national assembly given some different types of revolutionary changes or some reforms were introduced by this national assembly during those time. And the most important one, that large number of schools were introduced throughout France, which compelled girls' education. So in case of educational field, a kind of revolutionary change was introduced by the revolutionary government. But when Robespierre came or Jacobin club came to power in France, what is the most important step that Robespierre started in or imposed on these social changes were that firstly he banned all the political clubs started by women and made them again not at all a part of active citizen. And almost every important schools or educational field or educational setup also was closed for their or in front of ladies. So even though they had no any scope in the early time, they started to enjoy a kind of freedom under revolutionary government. But all such different types of enjoyments that they had was stopped by Robespierre. So such different types of changes were there. They believed that even though they have no any education, and we studied that as men were at a battlefield or were busy with revolutionary activities, women were forced to find out any kind of job to meet their family needs. And even though they had no any education, they were even started to be a manual laborer also. Along with their work outside to feed their family, many of them were fighting at home also. That means many different types of family or domestic duties also they had to face. That means they had double burden. One at outside, another one is inside. So even though they were fighting with all these changes, they were again on the way of fighting to get their rights for their own political freedom. So in case of French Revolution, along with the men, women also had their own role to play. And we have one great lady. We need to mention her name and her role. Olympe de Gouges was the most important lady figure of French Revolution. She was one of the most educated person also. And what is the important role that she had played during the time of French Revolution was that when the National Assembly prepared a constitution and the declaration of rights of men and citizens, she criticized it because in that declaration, rights of men and citizens were declared, but there is no any scope given for women. So in 1791, she wrote a declaration of rights of women and citizens, in which she described about whatever freedom that ladies in the French society need to enjoy. And she was one of the person who criticized the Jacobin club when all the political clubs or clubs of women were forcibly closed by Robespierre. So in 1793 or 94, she was arrested by Jacobin government and she was tried by the National Convention and she was found as a treason and later she was executed. So such greatest ladies were there in French society in order to inspire the remaining women folk of French society to come forward and to raise their voice against all this type of injustice. Number of newspapers were there, number of pamphlets were there. Through all these different ideas also of women, their demands, their rights that they need to protect, etc. were spread. So along with the men, women also had played their great role to make changes in the French society. Now let us discuss the most important change that the French Revolution brought to the whole world. That means during those time, especially Europe had a practice of slave system. That means considering human being itself or himself as a animal or a kind of machine who can be or which can be used in any other production areas especially. So during those times, that means from 17th century itself, slave trade was one of the most profitable trade enjoyed or practiced by Europe. And a triangle shaped slavery was practiced there. That means between Europe, Africa and America. Europeans used the people or slaves from African continent to work in the plantations in American continent. So a triangle shaped slavery was there. Europeans used African slaves or African people to work in the American plantation, and the product out of these American plantations were sold with much profit in European continent again. So this type of slavery was started to stop by Jacobin government. That was the most important change or revolutionary change that introduced into the world, especially to Europe, by the French Revolution. But it was only for a short period of time. When Napoleon came to, or when Napoleon became the emperor of France and the other European area, he reintroduced the slavery system. But till then, a kind of system or a kind of freedom was enjoyed by people when Jacobin Club or French Revolution brought to Europe. So abolition of slavery was one of the most important contribution by French Revolution to the whole Europe. One another important common change that happened in the France this chapter revolution was that they got or the abolition of censorship. That means That is one of the most important change, especially in the common life or in the everyday life of people. During or just before the French Revolution, that is in old regime, that means the political or social condition of France before 1789, if any news or any message or any book or any novel etc. need to publish, people or the writers or authors need to get the permission from the censors of king. Only with getting permission or after getting permission it was possible to publish any important product. But just after that French Revolution, there was no any such a censorship or there was no any such a restrictions. Everything can be possible to publish anywhere. That means freedom to express was one of the most important freedom or right that people enjoyed after French Revolution. So lots of newspapers, stories, novels, notes, etc. were started to spread firstly in the cities or in towns, later came into the extreme nook and corners of French society or French country together. So people started to get an idea about whatever things are going on around, and people from the corners of villages or even in the extreme remote areas started to hear about the new changes that is going on in their own nation. Especially about the three important catching words is like liberty, equality, fraternity. And they started to enjoy the same in their daily life when they got this freedom to express their ideas and even to criticize the rulers. So, along with the abolition of slavery, this one, that is cancellation of censorship, was another important change that the people started to enjoy in their daily life. So, French Revolution didn't make changes in the political atmosphere alone. Political or social or economical or even everyday life itself had its impact or influences just after French Revolution. That's why here it is also says that the great two important personalities who influenced and started to spread the important theories or messages of French Revolution in their own country to make changes in society was both persons, just like one is Tipu Sultan from South India and Rajaram Mohan Roy, the greatest social reformer of India. Both these persons were much impressed with the ideas of French Revolution, especially liberty, equality and fraternity. So, French Revolution have not only influenced their own society or not only the areas of Europe, the total world was influenced especially by that three catching words. That's why these two persons from India, that is Rajaram Mohan Roy or Tipu Sultan, also influenced, and they also kept a good relation with all the changes, modernizations of France during those times. So French Revolution is considered as one of the greatest influencing event in the world history that happened in 1789, where revolutionary change itself happened. Not only with the participation of greatest or intellectuals, but from the extreme humble birth itself. So, one of the most important world event was French Revolution, and we have gone through almost every important points of that chapter here. So, we are winding up this lesson and we will meet in the next class with any other lessons. So, thank you. Have a nice day.